Good evening, and welcome very, very much to this segment of the program where we're pleased to be in the offices of Mr. Sanford Weill, Sandy Weill, who's Chairman, Chief Executive Officer of Shearson Loeb.
Shearson Loeb Rhodes.
Shearson Loeb Rhodes, and Sandy, welcome very, very much to the conversation.
Thank you very much.
I wonder if you might, just for the general cable television audience, this Shearson Loeb Rhodes is now the second largest investment security house in the Wall Street area and so forth as a result of a number of gatherings of companies and so forth that you've managed to put together. But I wonder if you could, just at the outset, perhaps tracing your own historical development within the business and the development of the company, but the function of the securities industry. Perhaps you could spell that out in broad general terms, and then we could talk a little bit about some of these developments as we begin to look ahead. But the brokerage houses and the Merrill Lynch and the other companies that are involved in that, the general function they perform, what their role is in terms of the broader operation of the economy, and then perhaps you could weave that in with a little bit of your own historical development, if you could.
Well, I think that we think that the main function of the securities industry or the brokerage business is to make aware to users of a financial product the various opportunities that they can have with their savings and give them enough of a diversification in what they can buy, whether it be interest-bearing securities or stocks for growth or investments in real estate or insurance or annuities or any other kinds of products, so that we can basically offer the financial consumer a choice of what he should be doing, he or she should be doing, based on what his or her objectives are for their own financial security, as well as working with corporate America and helping them raise money so that they can increase their productivity and the development of their products so that they have the capital to expand their own horizons. And we try and match the needs of the corporate community with the needs of the individual consumer of financial products.
Yeah, so it would be very important for you and the people and the staff and the researchers and so forth to understand very well the overall workings of the economy, what's developing, what the good investment potentialities are, which companies and various technologies are having a good chance to make a good record as we begin to look ahead. It would be very important for you to have a good feel for the pulse of the economy as we begin to look ahead then.
I think that's true, more so for a lot of people in the company than myself, but being in this industry, and I like to think that I'm sort of a junior economist without title, and that I have the right to have my own thoughts on the subject.
Oh, well, certainly you have your own thoughts, and you would have thoughts probably that might go more toward thinking in terms of the broad overall operation of the economy itself, perhaps some policy issues that you'd be interested in that would affect broadly the structure of the economy.
That's correct. The potential for our country, which our company is very much tied up with.
Yeah. There has been a process in the last few months of a gathering together of a number of companies. It's been a process of a number of companies coming together. The term I'm trying to reach for is
mergers.
Mergers and so forth has been going. There were more companies that are becoming fewer and fewer. And I wonder, why do you feel that perhaps is happening? Why that process is going on now? There have been a number of brokerage houses, and they seem to be narrowing down to fewer and fewer larger houses. I'm not entirely sure if that's true, but I'm just wondering why, if that is true, you think that might be happening at this particular time in the American economy.
Well, I think that what you're talking about, which has been a very strong merger movement within the securities industry, is something that has taken place over the last 10 or 15 years rather than just the last year. And I think that that's happened as our industry has come of age and has had demands put on it where it's had to provide a broader service to the financial consumer, which required better managed companies, better capitalized companies, and companies that had the ability to attract the personnel resources so that they could provide that kind of product. I think what's happened in the securities industry in the decade of the 70s, when it went through a traumatic change, was probably no different than what happened to the automobile industry in its early stages, where there were many companies that made cars, and the industry consolidated to a few. Up until recently, it looked like those few were doing a good job in providing the product. I think they have a little problem right now.
They certainly do, yeah.
Hopefully they'll be able to overcome that and come out with a kind of car that the American consumer is going to want in the future. And I think that the securities industry has definitely been strengthened by this consolidation. I think they have developed you know, a smaller group of companies and stronger companies that will be able to provide the financial consumer with the product that he deserves. But we really don't have that many fewer companies in this industry than we've had in the past. And I think our industry has always attracted the entrepreneurial type person. And as we go into hopefully better equity markets in the future, I think that you'll see many new, younger companies growing up again that will be managed by entrepreneurial people that will find a niche in the market. And I think there'll be room for both the big and the small.
Yeah.
And a person should deal with the kind of company that can best provide them with the product that they want.
A more choiceful kind of situation, and that would be the kind of economy that we would really want to have, to be able to realize the best that entrepreneurial activity could allow, but also allowed for us to realize the economies of scale and the efficiencies of operation that a larger operation often do provide, whether it's in automobiles or in securities.
I think you're absolutely right. And you know, we are in a free society. In 1975, we went to unfixed rates in our business, like the airline business is doing today, or like they're talking about with the trucking industry. And you know, I think that a company that can survive in a free society is the kind of company that we really want in this country. And you know, that's what made this country strong, and that's what should continue.
It should continue and on into the future. If we could have that combination of both. I mentioned economies of scale. I suppose those economies of scale do apply in the financial securities industry, where you have a larger overview, a systems approach to being able to understand the broad operation of the economy. That gives increasing advantage to people like CEOs or people that are in positions of responsibility for understanding the relationship between parts of an overall system, so you can see the economy in more broadly conceived terms with a greater sense of responsibility. And the movement in that direction is one that I should think would be favorably seen by people in positions of increased responsibility like yourself.
Well, I think you know, that's part of the answer, what you're talking about, and being able to attract the kinds of people that can do the research and come up with the analyses that are required for making various kinds of investment decisions. But I think it's also important to have the resources where you can spend money in developing new kinds of computer software programs that will make your operation more efficient and make it less labor intensive. I think it's important to be able to get the financial information out closer to the consumer, which can be done through the computer these days, and having the money to spend on having a faster communication system so that you can execute the orders better on a timely basis for the person that wants to buy or sell a particular security. And the investment in data processing and the resultant software is a very expensive process and can't be afforded by everybody.
Yeah, it has revolutionized the industry in a sense, the oncoming of computer capability. It's hard to imagine the operation of this business or the economy as a whole almost without the computer. That was something that had to be taught and learned hands-on, and you had to have an understanding of the information processing, informational industries, as it were, the use of information. It's stepping up the whole metabolism of the economy, I wonder if you feel. Things are moving more efficiently, more rapidly, and allowing for, again, a systems understanding of events more comprehensively.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I started in this industry 25 years ago, and the average volume was about 1.5 million shares a day on the New York Stock Exchange, and everything was done by hand. The average volume today is somewhere in excess of 40 million shares. It could never be done by hand, and had we not had the computers, we wouldn't have the ability to have the kind of marketability that we now have in the U.S. markets, which I think is really the best in the world. So the computer really has revolutionized not only what we do today, but what we're going to have to do in the future. And I think we can use the computer to do more and more things in creating a greater marketability for the product that we sell.
Sure, absolutely. That's something that's crucial. And I don't know, I had a study once seen where something on the order of 48% of gross national product was information. It would seem almost in a certain information storage, retrieval, and various related systems relate to information services, and that's a very high percentage of gross national product. If that's in fact the case, we're in fact, entering an informational environment where information itself is of the essence in terms of the structure of the environment, perhaps more so than in the past. Huh?
Yeah, I don't know that the percentage that you use is
well, that was
right
Mark
or wrong,
Perot from the Office of Telecommunications
right.
Policy, yeah.
But it certainly is a growing area, and it's certainly a major segment in, what is part of our gross national product in this country today. I think that and the whole service industries area have been the fastest growing part of the American economy, and I think that unfortunately our political leaders in Washington don't really listen to the people from the service industries or from the high technology industries as to what our country really needs to increase productivity and get our system moving again, and is basically still listening to the people from the capital-intensive industries, which used to represent a major segment of our business, but really do not anymore.
That's a very interesting observation. I wonder if you might be able to elaborate a little more on some policy changes, some questions of the broad ground rule structures for the structure of the economy you think we might be able to improve on in order to have the economy function more appropriately with a future orientation.
Well, sure.
Yeah, please.
I think that we would be much better advised in whatever new tax policy we are to institute in this country, and both political parties are talking about tax cut, whether it's before the election or after the election. I think that's really inconsequential. And probably in the final analysis, it's going to be a tax package that's developed by Congress and not necessarily the one that's sent down by Ronald Reagan or Jimmy Carter. But I think that we'd be better advised to have our tax policy one that again begins to recognize the importance of savings and encourages savings and investment, rather than a policy that's just designed to speed up the depreciation allowance, which is basically something that's helpful to some part of our economy, but not to the whole broad base of our economy, which encompasses the whole service industry and the fast-growing technological industries. And I think that when you come to a point in this country where people are paying upwards of 70% of the money that they receive in interest on their savings account or on their bonds that they hold, or over 70% of what they receive in dividends from securities are going to the government, there's really a disincentive for that person to save. And what they do is look around, for various tax shelters or ways to get around that kind of investment, because it doesn't make sense anymore to the individual. And I think that's a big mistake, and I think that this whole concept of unearned income, which is the income supposedly that people make on the money that they earned, paid their taxes on, and have put into their savings, and the interest or dividends that they receive on that being called unearned, I think is a whole misconception in our system. And if you go back to really the translation of things that Benjamin Franklin said, and when he came up, and he didn't really say the words this way, but it's been translated over the years that a penny saved is a penny earned. And I think that certainly I grew up believing in the philosophy that a penny saved is a penny earned. And now, our tax code said that what you earn on that penny saved is unearned income, and it's taxed at a higher rate than everything else. I think that's a big mistake.
That's a little bit of a problem that could lead to the erosion of the principle of private property as a legitimate way of relating individuals or institutions to the productive process, meaning somehow that the only way you would earn income is if you had some sort of a laboring relationship to it. If that were truly the case, then that could lead to a great deal of confusion as we begin to look ahead at the capital formation requirements that are required as we look ahead. I wonder, do you think that is a problem?
I think it's definitely a problem, and I think what it does lead to is a person who makes his wages from laboring, as we all do, is encouraged to spend that money because there's no incentive to save it, because whatever you make from what you save is taxed away, so you might as well consume. And I think we've encouraged a little too much consumption, and I think that's we've had too many dollars chasing too few products without the incentive created in the corporate side to produce those products more efficiently.
I think that may have contributed to inflation.
Right.
Yeah. You think we've got inflation under control better than we had? It's coming down a bit, but it's still a major problem. Huh?
Yeah, I think inflation. Do you think it's possible for me to get a drink of water?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Just
Yeah, well, sorry about that. We should have thought to bring water in at the outset. We were just saying that the tendency to increase, increase spending or consumption, and there hasn't been an adequate amount of concern with the investment needs of the economy has contributed to an overall problem of inflation that the economy has had almost chronically for a long period of time.
Right.
Do you think that's going to continue a problem that's going to continue to plague the economy, or do you think we may have some way of getting at a long-term solution to the problems, the capital formation problems confronting the economy within a non-inflationary mode?
Well, I think it's very important that we control inflation. I don't think that our country can live successfully with a high level of inflation. The countries that thought they were able to do it and thought they can index the level of inflation to wages and everything else, like Brazil and other countries, have gotten into big problems. I think the inflation that we have in our system today is something that's been built into it over a long period of time, based on our system, based on some of our tax laws and the direction of our tax codes and other incentives or disincentives that have been created over the past 10 or 15 years. I think that we started to make some progress in fighting inflation when the inflation numbers finally got up to a level that nobody could really stand it. And I think that we're seeing some positive effects in the decline of that level of inflation now. But I think that the problem of inflation wasn't created in 2 or 3 months, and it's not going to be solved in 2 or 3 months. I think that we've had a little bad luck this summer in the fact that we've had a drought in the Midwest, which has increased food prices dramatically and will affect our food prices through the first half of 1981, which will make the inflation numbers a little worse than they might have been. But hopefully droughts are not a recurring thing. They haven't been a major factor in this country over the last 20 years, and I don't know any reason why the weather cycle is going to change that much. So I think that we should continue on this road of fighting this inflation number down to a number that we all can live with, which is significantly below the 10% number that people are talking about now, and hopefully that'll be the policy that'll be followed. Yeah, in a long term, if we look in a long-term sense, the ability to encourage capital formation or saving so that the investment capability is there for the technological systems to really fully allow themselves to fulfill their promise. I wonder, generally, do you think that the technological capability that's evolved in our economy, we have certain kinds of abilities, that the ability for us collectively as a society to do what it is we're technologically and in a knowledge base capable of doing is being hampered by the fact that there is through policy, through government policy, or from whatever purpose, is being hampered by the capital formation capability that overall our society has. And I wonder, over the next 5, 10 years out, as you look out, do you see large capital formation shortfall problems in terms of allowing the technological systems to fully realize their productivity, which presumably ultimately then would redound to the overall interest of the economy in a non-inflationary way? But the capital formation shortfall problems that people have seen in many quarters, I just wonder generally a broad, comprehensive kind of reading of the economic outlook. I think the shortfalls of the capital formation have really related to the policies that the government has created that relate to capital formation. I think that we certainly have the ability to generate the capital in this country, and it's a question of where it's going to be directed. Is it going to be directed overseas, or is it going to be directed internally? Is it going to be directed toward consumption, or is it going to be directed toward investment? And I think that if we were to change back some of our incentives that we took away in the investment process, I think that we'd have the capital to finance the development that we require in this country.
Do you think there's a good chance, in a political sense, we're going to be able to find our way through to those, those policy decisions in that order? I wonder if there's some specific bills or specific agenda before the government or the broad society that you might particularly think would be favorable of discussing in that regard.
Well, I think that the whole philosophy of the people in this country is coming back to something that's much more conservative. I think that they see that the philosophy of spending more than you take in, whether it's the government or anybody else, doesn't make any sense. And I think that we're thinking about, and more people are talking to the legislators in Washington about cutting back on the government process. And I have a feeling that there is a swelling up of feeling that there should be pressure put on the legislators to cut back on the government process and recreate the incentive for people to work hard and to save. And I'm hopeful that that's going to happen.
Yeah, be able to increase the strength of the private sector and allow the technologies to really come online and fulfill their full potential.
I think the real shame is when you compare securities values in the United States with those in Germany or Japan or some other countries. And certainly we've had many more years of history in the free enterprise system than they have in Germany or Japan, which basically has restarted up since World War II. And investors are paying twice the price for comparable securities of Japanese companies or German companies than they are for U.S. companies, because the tax laws are more favorable to investment in those countries than they are in the United States. I think we should be able to see our problem. And I think if we go back to where we were in this country when the country was growing and was being more productive, you would see security values here begin to approach and should surpass those of where they are in other countries. And U.S. companies would again be able to raise the capital that they need to finance the growth and development of buying modern machinery and equipment to be more effective and efficient.
Yeah, to get the rates of productivity up is a charge that's really basic to the health of the economy. Are you generally optimistic that we're going to be able to do that collectively as a society, or do you think we've got some real, or do you sometimes wax a little pessimistic as you look at the possibility of gaining a more, from your perspective, rational or appropriate organization of the society? What's your general outlook in terms of...
I'm not a pessimist.
Right, okay.
I've never thought that way. I wake up every morning filled with optimism.
Right.
I look forward to going to work and hopefully making my contribution to making the system better. And I believe it is a fantastic country with great opportunities. It always has been. I think it should be in the future, and hopefully we'll make the right decisions. So I'm optimistic.
You are optimistic, and you have a very good reason to be optimistic in the sense of your own personal development. I should think you're having let me ask you a personal question, if I may. Is it, you say you wake up in the morning and you very much enjoy going about your work. Are you enjoying going about your work increasingly more with each passing day? So is the pace of pleasure and enjoyment and sense of satisfaction from your work increasing through time, let's say, up until now, and we project that into the future?
Well, I haven't.
It's getting better all the time.
Right. I haven't had a year yet that I haven't enjoyed better than the year before.
Oh, really?
So
It just keeps getting better all the time, right?
I don't know when you get old, but I haven't found that yet.
Yeah, right. Okay, fine. Well, listen, I'll tell you, it's really very, very interesting, and I certainly do congratulate you from my perspective in terms of having been able to achieve the position you have of building what is now, I guess, the second largest in terms of assets security house within the investment security house within the community.
Well, we're right up there, right?
You're right up there now, and that's been through a series of mergers and so forth that you put together.
Over the last 10 years, right?
And it's come to the pinnacle of that now. And I wonder, do you think there's any chance? Can you see at any time in the future Shearson becoming #1, as it were?
Well, I think we like to look at our company from a shareholder's point of view, and I think the best way to judge how a company is doing is what is its return on equity.
Yes.
Because that's what the return the shareholders are getting.
Yes.
And we, for the last 5 years, have been #1 in our industry in return on stockholders' equity. So I think that's going to continue to be our goal, to return our stockholders the best possible return that they can get on their investment with our company,
As you have been doing.
as we've been doing.
That would recommend you well to those who would be interested in it, so it might be that you're not
We'll
looking to
try.
be number one, you may be number one now, right? Well,
That's how you look at it.
yeah, right. Okay, fine. Well, listen, thank you really very much. It's been a pleasure. Sorry we'll run out of time for this particular segment of the program, and I really do thank you very much. It's been a
Thank
great,
you very much.
It's been
Really
a great,
pleasure.
it's been a great pleasure talking with you. It's been a pleasure for you having the perceptions of Sanford Weill, who is, of course, Sandy Weill, who is the chairman and chief executive officer of Shearson Loeb Rhodes, the investment security house, talking succinctly about the problems of the specific industry and with a look at some of the broader policy questions that are confronting the overall economy toward achieving a more healthy situation as we look into the future. Happy to have brought you those perceptions. We invite you to stay tuned. There'll be more coming up in the same general topic area momentarily, but that's it for now. And once again, Mr. Weill, Sandy, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Welcome very, very much to this segment of Conversations, where I'm personally very, very pleased to be able to introduce as the guest Mr. Winston Lord. And Mr. Lord, Winston is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, and Mr. Lord, Winston, welcome very, very much to Conversation.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Mr. Chairman.
I wonder if you might share with myself and the cable television audience the Council on Foreign Relations. Could you share that with the cable television audience as an institution, what it's been involved in? Maybe
Sure.
we'll talk a little bit about international developments as we can begin to look ahead.
It's a private, nonpartisan organization that was set up about 60 years ago to discuss foreign policy, debate foreign policy, study it, and publish magazine and books on issues of international affairs. It's a membership organization, about 2,000 members, about 40% here in New York, 20% in Washington, and then spread out across the country. And so we have meetings with leaders from other countries and from the United States on foreign policy issues, prime ministers, foreign ministers, cabinet members, senators, congressmen, and so on, scholars. We publish the magazine Foreign Affairs, we publish books and articles, and we hold conferences and seminars, and we strive for diversity. We run from very liberal members to very conservative members, very liberal points of view to very conservative points of view, whether it's our speakers or our articles.
Even though in some cases it's a little hard to differentiate in the modern experience between liberal and conservative,
Yeah.
a lot of these things are getting mixed up and so forth.
You're entirely right. These are shorthand terms
Yeah, I
that sometimes
understand.
can get confused. But what I meant
Yeah.
to imply was that we don't have a particular point of view. We try to have debate. We try to be a neutral ground so that people of all points of view can come together and share their perspectives and to argue it out and
I
maybe
see.
produce new ideas or produce a new consensus.
And this would be toward the end of having good perception and thought as it relates to international developments with a particular emphasis upon the national interests of the United States historically and traditionally. That's been
What
the
should the
role.
U.S. policy be in the world? What
Uh-huh.
should America be trying to accomplish in its relations with other countries?
What should the United States be trying to accomplish? And that has been going, has that responsibility for a long period of time with a great number of people in positions of responsibility for the American society and government. And I wonder, yourself now as president of the council, do you feel that in a broad comprehensive sense that this is a time when the American people and the American leadership and the people responsible for the strategic or the position of the United States in the international arena, that we have a clear understanding of the directions which we're taking, or is this more of a yeasty time when perhaps we're trying to see our way through a time of some transitional period and so forth? I just wondered,
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. I don't think we have a clear
Uh-huh.
direction, although I think one may be emerging.
Uh-huh.
We had a fairly clear direction after World War II for maybe 20 years, where the United States was the predominant power in the world in military terms and economic terms. We were self-confident about our moral principles, and we sort of rallied around the banner of anti-communism around the world. And we have generally bipartisan support and a feeling that the United States should be firm in its dealing with communist nations, for example. This lasted roughly until the mid-60s. And then a combination of things happened where, of course, the Vietnam War brought all this to a head and the domestic divisions in this country. But also our allies were getting stronger, so many people felt they should be doing more in the world to help. The communist world was splitting up. The Russians and the Chinese were beginning to fight with each other and so on. So in the late 60s and early 70s, you had a tremendous reappraisal of our world role among the American people, and the consensus that we had for 20 years broke down. People felt that we were overextended, we were trying to do too much, that we were intervening in places we shouldn't. And again, Vietnam brought this to a head, then followed by Watergate. So then you had a period in the last decade, most of the 70s, where there was some uncertainty about our role. We had self-doubt. We were a little reluctant to intervene or to use power. We wanted to promote human rights and to restrain ourselves. We even doubted our own morality. And this period lasted for several years. And then you've seen just in the last couple of years a change once again, a sense that we've been on the defensive, that while we've been restraining ourselves, the Russians have been building up their military power, and the Day and the Cubans have been acting around the world, that we've been too apologetic for our principles, that we've been on the defensive. And of course the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the taking of our hostages in Iran sort of brought all this frustration to a head, and I think it largely contributed, along with the economic situation, to Reagan's victory over Carter. So now, to get back to your question, you have a coalescence around the need to have the United States act more firmly in the world, to build up its military strength, to solve its economic problems, and not to be so apologetic about our position. Now, it's still, however, fluid, because there will be some who will want to go back to the 1940s and 50s when we had overwhelming power, and others will recognize that there are many more centers of power in the world. We can't afford to return to that era. And so the question now is whether we can find a balance where we're not apologetic, not on the defensive, we are more resolute in our world position, but we don't become jingoistic, or we don't try to return to a nostalgic period which we can't recapture. So it's still somewhat fluid. We don't have a consensus yet, but I think there's the makings of one now. I think we've emerged from the immediate post-Vietnam era of self-doubt.
And carrying with it some of the responsibilities of leadership that remain there at those positions of understanding. It's interesting in a geopolitical perspective that the condition after the Second World War, and I think it was an article in Foreign Affairs, the X article that George Kennan postulated basically a policy of containment that was an idea that was abroad in that post-war period, went harking back to traditional geopolitical thought, Halford Mackinder, and the notions of there being a world island and a land-based power that could begin to extend its sway out from that land-based area on the rimland of the world island. That general traditional geopolitical way of thought was in the condition, in the thought of George Kennan, it would seem, in the minds of many. But then I wonder, do you think that some of those traditional thought patterns of the traditional geopolitical thought of in that train of thought have been changed by technological developments, or do you think that they still hold? Is the invasion of Afghanistan, in a certain sense, an extension of some traditional geopolitical thought, or is the nationalism that George Kennan would have foresaw from the 1945 period and so forth emerging around the edge of the rimland, showing that it's a much more of a bipolarized world, and we're able to see nationalism as the major point? I just wonder, a broad, comprehensive reading of a geopolitical philosophy.
Well, this is, of course, a complex issue. I do think nationalism is a very strong force in the world, and ultimately, I'm confident that the Soviet Union, even if it wished to, for example, couldn't really spread its influence throughout the world, because I think the nationalist instinct of countries would resist that, and so no single country can sort of dominate the world. Having said that, I do think we have to pay attention to geopolitical theories and implications. And I do think the Russians have been building up their power relentlessly now for 10 or 15 years at a pace far exceeding their defensive needs and far exceeding what we and our allies have been doing. And therefore, I think situations like the invasion of Afghanistan have to be taken seriously, and that there is a need to work with local countries and nationalisms to resist this kind of aggressive behavior, because this was a neutral country. It's the first time that the Soviet army has crossed borders outside the Eastern Bloc in Europe, and I think coming on the heels of other more indirect interventions by the Russians in Africa and the Middle East represents a very disturbing pattern. So therefore, to answer your question, we can take ultimate confidence that nationalism around the world will resist any single country taking over the world, certainly. But nevertheless, we cannot just ignore the extension of influence through aggressive means, as the Soviets have done in Afghanistan.
I wonder, the invasion of Afghanistan certainly caught most of the world quite, and almost in a certain sense, totally unawares, and alarmingly so. Did it catch you so, or had you been able to, in a certain sense, from your position, having worked in the State Department,
Right.
and so forth, had some inclination that this is something that might have been able to be foreseen, given developments. I just wondered if...
I have to admit, I was basically caught by surprise.
It was amazing.
I'll tell you why.
About a year ago now.
That's right. In 1978, there had been a coup in Afghanistan in which the Russians helped to install a regime very friendly to Moscow. And so the reason I was surprised is I didn't think the Russians would risk the international reaction to go into Afghanistan when they already had a regime that was friendly to it. It wasn't as if this was some hostile regime on their borders that was threatening their security. They already had a country that was not even really non-aligned anymore. They were leaning heavily toward the Soviet Union. So in that sense, I was surprised. In the sense that the Russians have been more adventurous in recent years, I'm not surprised in a broad sense, but that particular invasion I would not have predicted, and I don't think most people would have, even in the government. I haven't been in government now for 3 years. If I'd been in government, I would have seen more intelligence reports. I might have had a better feel for the situation.
Yeah, but even at that, I mean, we do get caught by surprise in some of these developments that happen, and that brought them, what, within 200 miles of the head of the Persian Gulf, and juggle or vein, in a certain sense, of Western industrial economy. So it was a great immediate concern.
That's right. They may not have a master plan to go out and conquer the Gulf, but objectively, their airfields and the logistic situation has moved that much closer to the Gulf, whereas I'm sure you know that so much of the oil of not only our own country, but even more so Europe and Japan moves through the Straits of Hormuz, and it's a very crucial area for Western security.
It has become really a focus of geopolitical concern. I should think at this particular time in history, that's an extremely vital area of the world.
Well, it is extremely vital, and it points out, however, another issue, and that is the importance of what we do, what our allies do in economic terms, particularly in energy, for our foreign policy, the interreaction between the two.
Yes.
Because whatever we do in geopolitical terms about the Persian Gulf area or resisting the Soviets, there are other threats to our oil out there. The Iran-Iraq war, which has very little to do with the Soviet Union. There could be coups, internal instabilities in various countries which could threaten the oil fields. And so one of the key lessons here is even as we try to resist Soviet pressures, it's absolutely essential for our foreign policy and our national security that we reduce our dependency on oil from that region, and generally reduce our dependency. And it's important that we move into other sources of energy, other sources of oil, and that our allies do the same. So it points up how a good foreign policy these days, and a strong one, depends on a strong economy at home and getting on top of our energy dependence problem.
Yeah, the economic component of the world geopolitical realities, as it were, is in the minds of many becoming to be fully as important as perhaps traditional man on the ground with a gun in his hand concepts of military
Exactly right.
strength.
The whole definition of power, what counts in world politics, has fundamentally changed. Certainly military power is still extremely
It's got to be
important.
basic, yeah.
But economic power has now become, as you say, just as important. This has been particularly evident since 1973 war in the Middle East when we had the oil embargo. It does give us some grounds for hope if we can lick our economic problems, because the only thing the Soviet Union does well, and I keep mentioning the Soviet Union because I think they are our principal adversary.
Yes.
I would hope we could construct, by the way, a peaceful relationship with them. We can come back to that.
Yes, I'd hope, yeah.
I think we have to have a two-track approach. But nevertheless, they do remain our major adversary for the foreseeable future. But the only thing the Soviets do well is build up military power. They've shown they can do that very well.
And they've been doing it.
But they've been doing it, and it's a source of real concern, and it's why we have to build up our own defenses. Having said that, if we build up our own defenses, and if we solve our economic problems, over the long term, we should be in good shape in terms of competition with the Soviet Union. Because aside from building up military power, they have put on a dismal performance. Their economy is in bad shape. They're particularly dependent on the outside world, on us and our allies for grain and food and for technology. Their ideological appeal around the world is dismal. People don't really like communism. It hasn't brought them a very good life in many respects. They have their own problems internally with their nationalities, where the non-Russian population will exceed the Russian population in terms of plurality within a very few years, and their own Muslim minorities, for example, in the southern part of their country, representing tension. They will have a squeeze between their military expenditures and what their own people want in terms of a better life. They have to worry about China on one border and Eastern Europe on the other. All of this is not to say that we don't have a problem with them. We do.
Not to mention possibly Afghanistan and the South.
That's right.
There was to be an effective resistance to that.
That's
in
right.
nationalistic terms. But,
So all I'm pointing out is that we have to keep in balance. On the one hand, we have a serious problem, and we have to restore the military balance. On the other hand, for the long term, we shouldn't consider the Russians 10 feet tall, because they have
problems.
very big problems. And looking ahead for the next 30 or 40 years, I'd much rather be in our shoes than in their shoes.
Well, we've been very, very well blessed in this country and have had an incredibly bountiful geographic situation, which has been of great benefit to us, and a great, strong economy and so forth. They have their problems. They do have a strong sense of historical mission in terms of a Marxist-held view of the inevitability of the establishment of a world socialistic order in which, in inevitable historic terms, the capitalist systems will...
Well, but I think they've lost some of that. They've become sort of jaded and bureaucratic, and they've lost their original zeal. And to me, the threat is Soviet geopolitical power and not communist ideological appeal.
That doesn't factor into something that would give them a sense of internal, centripetal power. Perhaps, maybe not. Yeah, I know there was great concern of that after the Second World War, when one looked at the whole world island, which seemed to be becoming communistic under one ideology, and there was a great deal of reaction to that.
Well, again, I'm concerned about the Soviet threat, as I've made clear, and I think we have to tend to our defenses. We have to act more resolutely. So I'm not dismissing that. I'm just saying that I don't think they can spread their influence through the appeal of communist ideology or the way communism leads to a good life, because wherever you look at where there's been a communist society, they've done very poorly economically for their people. So I don't think they have much ideological appeal. I think the problem is Soviet power, and this is a problem. We have to deal with it.
And they have been building up their military base, their military capacity, both in sea power and land-based conventional weapons capability and strategic capability as well.
At every level. At
every level, and disproportionate to what one might have hoped or expected in at least the spirit of détente.
That's correct. No, I agree. They at every level, and it's been a disappointment. And I think we're going to have to show them that we're willing to match them. Ideally, one would like to lower the arms race through arms control, and I think we should still try. But we cannot let that get in the way now of what we have to do to restore the military balance. And maybe when the Russians see that we're serious about matching their military strength, we may have more productive talks on arms control. I hope so.
We've had positive good news this year, or at least coming to a fruition this year, in the opening in China. You must have been involved in a number of the developments that were attendant upon the opening of China, and that is such a major story, if that's the right term, the geopolitical unfolding of the that's a major development we have to take into
account. I'm a little biased here because of my own involvement, but I think it's the single most important and positive development in the last 20 years in geopolitics is the new relationship the United States has with China. I am biased. I was involved I was in the first secret trip with Henry Kissinger that went in July '71. I went on the Nixon summit, the Ford summit. I've been on every trip to China in those years, 10 times, met with all the Chinese leaders. So I've been heavily involved. And we should have no illusions. The Chinese don't share our philosophy or social system. They're not going to be instant friends and allies. But we don't have any real clashing national interests. It's in our interest that China be independent and not threatened by the Soviet Union. It's in our interest we try to help them develop their economy. And they help to balance global world power situation just by virtue of their antagonism with the Soviet Union. We shouldn't use them in a clever way against the Soviets. We should try to have better relations with both. But neither, on the other hand, should be fear to develop a good relationship with China because this might antagonize the Soviet Union. We ought to develop our relations with China on their own merits, for economic reasons, cultural and humane reasons, and security balance of power reasons, and not use it in a short-sighted way either to manipulate against the Soviet Union or to be scared of the Soviet Union. We ought to just develop it on its own merits. And I think it's got great potential, and I think it's been very encouraging.
Yeah, it certainly has been encouraging. One of the most encouraging things, as you said, in your 20 years, the recent 20 years, I wonder if I could reverse the question possibly and say, what has been the most discouraging development that you could see in the past 20 years from your perspective of having followed these issues very carefully? What the major area of concern then in terms of development is? Or maybe that's not maybe it's a series of things.
Well, I think it's more this trend that I mentioned earlier from the late 60s until the late 70s of the United States on the defensive, both in moral terms and in geopolitical terms. The Soviets building up their power and are feeling impotent and feeling apologetic. And I think we're emerging from that period, which is healthy. But I think this trend has been the most disturbing. Now, obviously, the single most painful element was the Vietnam War. I mean, that was a defeat for the United States. It ripped our society apart. It set families and generations against each other. It killed many of our young. My own view was that we had good intentions, and I do not think we were immoral. On the other hand, I think it was a geopolitical mistake. It just shouldn't have been there. But not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't practical. But whatever one's views of that war, and honest people can disagree, there's no question this took a heavy toll on our youth, on our society, on our economy, and we're just emerging from the impact of that. And just as we began to emerge from it, and I was heavily involved in the peace negotiations, which ended that war and helped to make the final peace agreement. Just as it looked like we were healing our wounds and emerging from that, then we were hit by Watergate. Watergate had a major impact on our foreign policy because it undercut executive authority, and it meant that we were weaker in acting around the world, and this added to our problems.
War Powers Act?
Yes, and so Vietnam and Watergate together, I think, represented a major setback to us, and we're just recovering from it.
And then on top of that, we get the oil embargo of 1973, which didn't help in domestic terms. So it was a 1-2-3 punch in a certain sense that came and sort of shattered the sense of confidence in terms of some purpose or sense of direction for the American spirit, as it were, or direction that it had. That we've been sort of in a malaise. Was it President Carter who said we were in a national malaise?
That's right. But the mistake he made was, I think there was a certain malaise, but it's up to leaders to show the American people how you conquer that malaise and emerge from it, not just to describe a sickness, but to say we can do something about it and here's where we're going to go. And so I think Reagan's more upbeat approach struck a resonant chord, and I think, as I say, that the American people's spirit is rebounding now, and I'm quite hopeful now that we can get on a more constructive path.
You said earlier on, in terms of the Vietnam, that you felt that it was a mistake geopolitically, not necessarily we were morally correct, but that it was geopolitically or in strategic terms an inappropriate thing to do. I think it was Reinhold Niebuhr once observed or wrote a book, if I'm not mistaken, I may be tired, but it was Moral Nation, Immoral World, the general proposition being that nationalism being the basic realm by which people gain a sense of identity, that is the realm to which they owe allegiance, and the international realm, strictly the only criteria by which international relations can be judged is the national interest of the various entities that make up the international community. Do you think that as the world becomes more increasingly interdependent and if not federation or increasingly confederated or global context to the responsible leadership, that the globe or the planet or the whole international system is emerging to the point where there is an international order that is beginning to have a greater degree of authority or a higher order of consideration other than the national kinds of considerations that have been traditionally the ground rules by which nations have been. Do you understand what I'm saying? Is there a new world consensus or something that you can see? Or
no.
I'm afraid. Yes. Well,
I
just thought I'd ask.
I think nationalism will still be the dominant force in the world, and this isn't necessarily bad as long as nations respect other people's national interests. But world order is not in the cards for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, you don't think that could begin to happen to where some of the institutions, some of the like the United Nations, or some of the do you understand?
It would be good to have some of that, particularly in areas like outer space or new areas where...
Well, the Treaty of the Seas. We did an interview recently with Mr. Richardson, and he originally said that they had virtually every nation was involved in that. He felt there might have been to begin to be a spirit of...
Well, this is when you get into areas like the seas or outer space where you don't already have well-established national claims, then it would be healthy if we could have an international regime so we don't have future terrains which nations are going to fight over. But in terms of traditional interests, I really think the national interests are going to prevail, And as I say, this isn't necessarily unhealthy as long as nations can respect each other and not be aggressive. But we're a long way from any international order, even though we should try to work toward it in many respects.
Do you think we began the interview by talking about American purpose and so on. Do you think we have a clear sense of traditional enunciated purpose for the American experiment that we can say we, in a sense, stand for? Certainly, what? A democratic,
well, I think we certainly...
free society are things that we more or less stand for in traditional terms.
Well, there's certain things we stand for in our own society.
Yes, and by which we can then gauge allegiances and
well, we have to be
alliances.
careful here. Freedom and liberty, and this can be attractive to people around the world, and it is. And we ought to stand for it, and be proud of it, and pronounce it, and express the hope that others can enjoy these blessings as well. But we have to be careful, and where I think we went to excess in recent years is to try to impose our vision of a perfect society in other countries. They have their own cultures, their own traditions, their own security problems, and we cannot expect instant democracy like our own in other countries. So, on the one hand, we should hold up our own ideals and our own way of life, be proud of it, try to live up to our traditions, express the hope that the rest of the world will move in this direction, but be sensitive to the fact that other countries don't like to be told how to run their own systems, and not try to impose our ideals on others. And where there are outrageous human rights violations, we should speak out against them and work on them quietly as well in diplomacy. But we should not expect every country to be an instant democracy. So there I think we have to draw the line.
No, I think I was thinking more rather in terms of if as in a nationally oriented world order, and if we are then having tried and true allegiances and alliances with our, say for instance, our traditional allies. It goes with a long historical tradition of common shared values, some of the European allies that we have and so forth. Some of these are questions that might be addressed more carefully, how we can be certain of those traditional ties. There's some problems involved with that. But then it means also being able to be sensitive to the implications of, let's say, the Pacific sector and Japanese emergence, which we have not had that traditional tie, perhaps in the same way that we had. I don't know. Well, I'm trying to get at the basis by which we are able to most effectively determine our the principles by which we would form firm and solid alliances and so forth.
Well, I think you put your finger on what I consider the single most important foreign policy challenge of this administration, and that is to develop stronger ties with our industrial democracy allies in Europe and Japan. Everything else we do in the world depends on good relations with these countries. As you pointed out, these are the key countries that share our values, our liberties, our way of democracy. So we have a moral, inspirational tie with these countries. And that's very important in a world where there's many ideologies that we disagree with. It's important to have some countries that we share these aspirations with. Secondly, we have important economic ties with them. Thirdly, we share security concerns versus the Soviet Union. And fourthly, in dealing with the developing countries and the poorer countries, it's important we work with our rich industrial friends in order to find ways to improve these problems or the solutions to these problems. So in every kind of issue that you see in the world facing us, working with our allies who share our democratic principles is absolutely crucial. And so I would put Europe and Japan at the top of our agenda. It's very important.
Top of our agenda, and that would be going in terms of some traditional values, and there's a long-standing, there are some problems in both of those areas, that have to be
We have great problems with
addressed.
both, and we should not pretend that these are going to go away easily. They're allies, they're friends, but we have economic frictions, we have different views of the Soviet Union, we have different degrees of dependency on Persian Gulf oil, and therefore different views on what constitutes as the right principles in the Middle East, for example. And therefore, we're going to have to work out these economic differences, these security differences. I think we can, but it's going to take great sensitivity on both sides. It's going to mean that our allies are going to have to do more in the world to help shoulder responsibilities. And in return for that, we're going to have to give them more influence on decision-making in the process. So we want them to do more in terms of providing resources. In return, we've got to give them a greater say over what we're up to. And this, to me, would be a good bargain with our European and Japanese allies.
Yeah, right. And then that might, and we obviously then we'll have to address the north-south question of the have and have-nots, and perhaps eventually arrive at a world order that could be able to begin to be moving us all toward a goal in terms of the human purpose at this particular
Well, it's going to take some time.
Are you generally optimistic about the human prospect?
Quick answer is yes, but
Good.
one always has to qualify the
Yes,
answer.
yeah.
I'm generally optimistic.
It can be done. We can find our way
Well,
through
the kind
the
of
thorny problems.
vistas you were painting,
Yeah.
it's going to take a very long time. So, but I think we're capable of keeping the world from blowing up
But that's
and gradually moving toward a more humane world society. It's not going to be an international world order
no, not a me.
for a very long time, if ever. That isn't necessarily bad, because there's certain national characteristics that we cherish.
Yeah.
We don't want to have submerged in
Right.
some world order. I think
Yeah.
we want to stand for our own
Yeah.
principles.
Well, surely, yeah. And there are some historically inherited institutional assumptions that are entirely appropriate to be kept in terms of the way in which we might be able to move with new possibilities. Well, it's one thing. I think it's an ancient Chinese proverb that it's, what is it? I'm not sure if it is, save me from living in interesting times, I think, because it's so crucial. We live in perhaps the most incredibly interesting times ever in the history of the world. There's so much technological development now and rapid change. We live in a time of incredible challenge and opportunity in terms of the available to us as we begin to look ahead for the human prospect in a wide, comprehensive canvas. And I don't know anywhere that I can think of offhand where the issues of strategic and geopolitical and world strategy and questions of the American role in the world has been more responsibly handled and dealt with over the long years than the Council on Foreign Relations.
That's very kind.
I certainly congratulate you on being appointed as president of an institution that's so much responsible for these, and I hope this altogether too brief, I'm sorry, maybe we'll do this again or something, altogether too brief conversation might have helped share some of these perceptions with the broader citizenry to the limited degree that we're able to do even here in cable television. But I'm sorry, we've run right out of time for this particular segment. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Well, I've enjoyed it, and it's important that the council get out beyond its membership and reach some of the wider public, so I'm glad to have had this opportunity.
Fine, fine. I'm happy to have been able to afford that opportunity to you. It's a nice mesh, perhaps, right? And may I didn't just say, I'd like to remind you that it has been your pleasure to have the perceptions of Winston Lord, who is currently, after a long and distinguished career in understanding the American position in the world, is currently president of the Council on Foreign Relations. Very, very happy to bring you those perceptions, and we invite you to stay tuned. We're running short on time. We invite you to stay tuned. There'll be more coming up in the same general topic area. But that's it for this segment. Coming right back in Winston. Once again, thank you very, very much indeed.
Enjoyed it.